Welcome to the CDG BizCast. I'm your host, Christian Gonzalez, owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. Today's episode is something special. The entertainment world is buzzing as Paramount and Warner Bros. Discovery move towards a massive merger, and the ripple effects could reshape everything from streaming bundles to blockbuster franchises. To unpack the possibilities, I'm joined for the first time by our new consumer panelist, Cesar Blanco. We're mapping out several what-if scenarios and exploring how each one could impact viewers, creators, and the broader media ecosystem. If you want a clear, engaging look at where the industry might be headed, this episode is for you. Welcome, Cesar. I'm glad to have you on CDG BizCast today for the first time ever. I look forward to hearing your insight on this very important topic because right now the media world is buzzing about this. Everybody who is following this merger is talking about it, and I wanted to do an episode that was a little bit different than what everybody else is doing. But yes, welcome to our show. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Christian, for having me here. And it's an honor to be here with you to discuss this matter.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of people are somewhat concerned. Others are excited about this merger. And I need to mention that one thing that's going to make this episode different versus what all the other material that you see on YouTube right now is that we're going to talk about certain potential scenarios that could happen. Everybody else is just talking about the merger in general and how it's going to impact people. But we're going to go a little bit further than that. We're going to talk about what the Ellison family, David Ellison being the current owner of Paramount Skydance, could do and how we could see the media landscape change, in addition to how things will change for the consumers as well. And we will be talking about this from a non-political perspective. I've noticed a lot of people are talking about this from a political perspective, and we are not going to do that here. We are going to simply talk about what potentially could happen after the merger is completed. And I feel that a lot of other people are not talking about this right now in terms of the what ifs. Everybody's just basically going over what's going to happen. We're going to take it a little bit further than that.
Right. Sounds great.
So the first thing I want to talk about is why this merger matters and why people should pay attention to it. So media mergers are nothing new. Within the past few years, we've seen a lot of mergers going on. In fact, Paramount, which used to be known as Viacom CBS, is the result of the merger of Viacom and CBS Corporation, which personally, I do not really consider that big of a deal since both companies were already majority owned and controlled by National Amusements to begin with. National Amusements sold the combined company to David Ellison's Skydance company just last year. It just seems rather abrupt that right after this major acquisition, Ellison's already looking to make another major acquisition. And prior to all this, we've seen all sorts of media mergers going on. More recently, we saw Disney and 21st Century Fox merge back in 2019, and everybody thought that was a big scary deal. However, it does seem like that Paramount and Warner Bros. Is probably going to be much, much bigger than that due to the amount of cable networks are going to own, in addition to the IP that Paramount would be adding to their overall content library. First, let's talk about how this merger is going to be different. So, for one thing, would you agree or disagree that this merger is probably a much bigger deal than any of the other mergers that we've seen in recent years? We've seen Disney merge with Fox. We saw AT&T acquire Time Warner back in 2018, which resulted in them rebranding as Warner Media, which was then spun off and sold to Discovery to form the current Warner Bros. Discovery in 2022. Would you agree or disagree that this merger is probably a bigger deal than all the others?
Well, I definitely say it's different from AT&T and Warner Brothers merging together in the sense that, well, if you look at it, AT&T is a telecommunications company, so it's much different than what Warner Brothers brings, which is movies, TV, home media, all that stuff. And then when you compare it to Paramount and Warner Brothers, so we've got two big names in Hollywood. Both of them produce movies, and in that sense, it is different. Now, as for Disney and Fox, I think I could see that being comparable to this new merger that's going on because both of them are reputable, especially at that point, they were reputable filmmaking companies. So I would say it's not that much different from the merger from Disney and Fox from, on paper standpoint. But what happens behind the scenes, we'll see what happens this merger still has time before it wraps up. But in terms of AT&T and Warner Brothers, which don't have necessarily paralleling history, yeah, that's different.
Yes, very true. AT&T and Warner Brothers was a vertical merger because they were in two completely separate, unrelated industries. However, it wasn't their first time being owned by a major telecom company. We all remember that several years ago that Time Warner owned Time Warner Cable. This is probably the second time that Warner Brothers saw itself co-owned with a major distributor. And then, of course, we also had Comcast and NBC Universal, which was also a similar structure. Which, by the way, will be dwarfed once this merger happens, because right now Comcast does not really have that much to offer beyond the NBC network and Universal Studios due to them spinning off several of their cable networks into Versant earlier this year. You know, it just seems like that as each year goes by, the number of media companies is shrinking more and more. So right now we have Comcast, we have Disney, and we have Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery. But now it looks like we're going to be well on our way to just 3 companies now. So this does make consumers a bit concerned, worried about how only 3 companies are going to control the majority of what they see on TV or in the movie theaters. And, you know, when it comes to Paramount and Warner Brothers, the scale of the combined libraries of both is going to be massive. So, you know, from a consumer perspective, what's the first thing that people think when they hear about a merger this big? What are the very first things that come to mind?
Well, most definitely monopoly comes to mind. And right now, I don't think this was the case, maybe except Disney and Fox, which I'm not very informed about. But at least here with Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery merging, there's this discussion concerning the theaters, which I will say this, streaming has been a go-to staple for many people, not only in the United States, but internationally. So we've basically based off our worldly culture on streaming movies, TV series, etc. And it's now gotten to the point where we no longer are having DVDs. They're basically a niche at this point. DVDs, Blu-rays. Oh, don't even get me started on VHSs. So apart from that, oh yeah, speaking of streaming, I've heard rumors that HBO Max, which used to be called just Max a few years or so ago, I can't remember. Apparently, HBO Max is predicted to shut down by the end of 2027. So what I think will happen there is with the merger, I would expect Paramount Plus to absorb HBO Max and thus consolidate their library into one. And from there, you will see lots of Paramount and Warner Brothers collaborations and movies that each individually has released or distributed or whatever. Oh, and speaking of collabs, you'll see plenty of crossovers from Paramount to Warner Brothers within their own catalogs. So let's say SpongeBob decides to collab with Scooby-Doo. You could have that happen. I think that would be a big area of conversation. The fact that you can have these different permutations of crossovers between one franchise to another. And I think with the creative history that both of these companies have, I think that it allows Paramount to have some flexibility, and Warner Brothers as well, this new merger, flexibility in what creativities they could give birth to, or, you know, maybe a new idea is born out of such. But to summarize with you, the different combinations and permutations of crossovers, that would be one thing. And of course, there's monopoly concerns, which I totally get. But at the same time, Netflix has had a monopoly in of itself with streaming. Well, not just Netflix, but the streaming industry has had a monopoly on the filmmaking industry. So there's that as well. And then for theater owners, it's good news because they might see a resurgence in revenue if Paramount indeed decides to go with this strategy, which they will implement, which I'm not informed of, but, you know, Netflix has been a streaming company for a long, long time. And so I think Paramount buying Warner Brothers Discovery would be beneficial for movie theaters like Cinemark or Regal Entertainment, etc. So I guess those are my 3 topics that I would say would be discussed amongst one another.
It's also interesting that you brought up Netflix, because a lot of the people who were against Warner Brothers being acquired by Netflix were all speculating that would be the end of theatrical movies, that anything released by Warner Brothers would all be going straight to streaming. And there's a lot of people out there who still want to be able to have that experience, to go to a movie theater and enjoy a movie the old-fashioned way. A lot of people are not big on streaming because, in a way, streaming just takes the excitement of seeing a movie right out of it, because you are watching a movie on your phone screen, on your computer, or on your TV, and that pales in comparison when you're going to a movie theater with a nice big screen and extraordinary sound system with stadium seating. There's just no other experience like it. To see movies just go straight to streaming would be sad. Now, I do recall that Netflix said that they would still give Warner Brothers films a small theatrical window. However, it was a very short one. Then it goes straight to streaming, which to me, that doesn't sound profitable. And that just sounds like a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Like I said, Netflix has built their name and reputation and image on streaming. Well, they first did DVDs and renting and stuff, and now they've moved on to streaming. So yeah, like you said, I did see that they were supposedly going to allow theatrical windows, but our culture has been changed from going to your local Cinemark or Regal Entertainment Theater and then munching on your popcorn or your nachos or hot dogs and your soda to, you know what, let's just watch the movie on my phone and stay at home. Like, I think it says a lot about our cultural shift from going in person to see the real deal with an elevated experience to, you know, let's just stay home and not do anything, and then we could just watch it on our TV or our phone. I think more than anything, it says a lot about culture. So that's my thing.
Streaming has been a thing for a very long time. Streaming has been very popular for the past decade. It's been around longer than that. However, COVID has further fueled this convenience of streaming, because when people were locked down at home, they knew that if they wanted to watch the latest movie, all they needed was a subscription to whichever streaming platform that movie they wanted to see was on. We're going to talk more about streaming here. So let's talk about what could possibly happen with this merger. So you said it earlier that Paramount Plus could end up absorbing HBO Max, which subsequently HBO Max absorbed Discovery Plus right after Warner Brothers was acquired by Discovery Communications. As more content is added to a streaming platform, that could mean the monthly cost for these subscriptions could increase, which will certainly raise customer concerns. What do you think could possibly happen in terms of how consumers feel about this? Do you think maybe they will feel that there are too many choices of streaming going on right now? Do you think consumers would prefer to have an individual app, you know, to keep HBO and Paramount separate, or would they rather have one that unifies all of them? Because there is a possibility that consumers might feel overwhelmed by all these subscriptions, because there's just so many streaming platforms out there. So as a consumer, what would probably be considered the best in consumer choice? Having one subscription that handles all of them, or having individuals? Because this merger could result in Paramount absorbing HBO Max, which as a result absorbed Discovery Plus. So it is shrinking the number of choices out there. However, as a consumer, what's your opinion about this?
Well, my first thing is, I don't know if this is talked about, but I think there should be a package that allows for exclusively, you know, TV series and live TV, etc., like sports. Right now, TNT has the NHL, and CBS, subsequently Paramount, they have the NFL and college basketball. I think first and foremost, I would create a package that will cover TV, anything TV. Now, in regards to Paramount and HBO Max, I think that a lot of people might get upset that, you know, HBO Max is not a thing anymore if they view that as a name that's, you know, it's a name, I believe, that's built a reputation. But I think to be more organized and to, you know, not be bouncing all around Paramount Plus or HBO Max, I think it would be convenient to merge both of them into one app so that people can have the choice of what to watch. And I think that having one subscription or another, it's just not, you know, people will be turned down over that. So I think combining them into one package, it might be a little more expensive, but I think in the long run, it'll be more convenient to have than just merely having Paramount Plus and then HBO Max and then having to flip-flop between one service or another. And yeah, so, and also for our theatrical purposes, if we have that 45-day window, that option that doesn't include theatrical releases yet will be very convenient. So given that they go watch the movie in theaters. So yeah, that's my solution. Merge them all into one, make a package that dedicates itself to TV series, live TV, etc.
I think that's a great plan. And I would even take it further by offering it in tiers. I would say, okay, at this low tier, you can get access to this library of TV shows. And then the next tier includes a library of TV shows and movies. And then the ultimate tier, which, you know, of course, I'm saying this arbitrarily, but maybe the highest tier out of all of them could include everything in the previous tiers plus access to theatrical releases before they get released into theaters. And one other possibility that could arise out of this could be the end of the HBO and Showtime family of networks. So these are premium channels. Warner Brothers Discovery owns HBO and Paramount owns Showtime. I could definitely see these suites of premium cable networks being discontinued because they may just feel that they're no longer profitable anymore because people are cord cutting in favor of streaming. And if people are cord cutting, what are the chances that they're going to subscribe to the more expensive cable packages that include these networks? Chances are that's probably pretty low in this day and age with everybody going to streaming. I honestly don't see HBO or Showtime networks surviving this merger. The Ellisons are probably going to see them as some of the fat they need to trim as they get ready to adapt to the cord cutting culture. Now, there are a lot of content on these channels, but people can access them easily on a combined HBO and Paramount Plus app. That's my theory of what's going to happen next. And, you know, people will pay more if they feel that there's value. So in order for there to be value, the subscriptions really have to offer something unique. They have to offer something that they just can't refuse. It has to look more attractive than having really expensive cable packages.
Yeah, I agree. I think in terms of cable, with the culture that has been going from cable to streaming, I think that is an area where streaming could be prevalent and not that big of a deal. So I agree, pulling away from cable like Showtime and all these other channels. Yeah, Cinemax, that's another one that I remember from back in the day. So yeah, I agree. Our culture is now cutting the cord because it's no longer profitable and no longer something worth spending your hard-earned money on. And I'm quite honestly not against that. I think in that regard, streaming would fill in that void that has been left by cable. So yeah, I don't know if services like Dish or DirecTV could do this, but let's say, for example, Dish Network, we still have Showtime, Cinemax, and all these other dedicated channels to movies and such. I don't know what you think about this, but they could make it into an app that's based off of their streaming services and offer it there. And it could be interactive, just like whenever you're on your phone. So I think that's one thing that they could consider. Yeah, that's what I think. Although I still think that there has to be a traditional theatrical window. Streaming could serve where cable has left us. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yes, very true. Streaming can definitely take over cable in terms of how people get their pay TV experience these days. Yes, people are cord cutting like crazy, and it's even being rumored right now that Comcast may end up discontinuing their traditional cable services sometime later this year. That has not been confirmed nor denied, but it is being speculated. And why are they doing this? For the very reason that we're having this conversation. People aren't just simply switching over to streaming now. They're finding it to be cheaper and more convenient, especially if they can pull up their favorite shows and watch them whenever they want versus having to wait for them to come on linear cable networks at a certain time. And, you know, as for local TV, people can just get an antenna and they can watch all their local channels for free. No cable necessary. So that's another thing right there. If they want to cut the cord, switch to streaming, but still have access to all their local area channels, that's your solution right there. Get an antenna and watch them that way, and then have your streaming platform for all your favorite shows and movies. Now, the speculation about Comcast is that should they discontinue their traditional cable TV services, they're going to have everybody migrate over to Xfinity Stream, which basically is all of Xfinity's channels, but available through a streaming app instead of through a cable outlet and a cable box. So if your smart TV can get the Xfinity app, which I don't know why it wouldn't, they all should be able to, then you would be able to still watch TV the traditional way, but just without a cable box and without a cable outlet. So that means you don't have to spend money on equipment or have to have an outlet installed in your house. So that's definitely one alternative. They're basically taking traditional cable and turning it into a streaming app. So basically the best of both worlds, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Now I want to talk more about how the new combined company could potentially handle all of the cable networks they're owning. So for one thing, this new company is going to be massive in terms of cable networks. They're going to own more cable networks than any other company out there. We're talking about CNN being owned with CBS, which is the broadcast network. We're talking about Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, once rivals, now about to be owned by the same company. This also includes networks such as the Discovery Channel, Food Network, HGTV, Turner Classic Movies, TNT, TBS, TV Land, MTV, VH1, the Paramount Network. The company will also own a minority stake in the CW network, which, as you know, both companies individually were co-partners in and have both sold their stakes to Nexstar, which is in the process of merging with Tegna as we speak, but that's a whole separate matter altogether, not related to this. So that's what I'm saying. This is going to be huge. All of these networks are going to be under one umbrella, and it also includes the three that we mentioned just now, HBO, Cinemax, and Showtime. This is going to be one behemoth of a company. In terms of the IP that they're going to own, all the cable networks alone are just going to be legion. I mean, this is huge. So my first question for you is, as a consumer, out of all these networks that I mentioned, do you watch any of them? And in general, which of these networks do you think people will miss should they decide to get rid of some of them? In just a few minutes, I'm going to talk about the possibilities of networks getting sold off. But first, I want to know, which of these networks did you watch, if any of them? And which of these networks do you believe the consumers are going to miss should they end up getting shut down or sold or folded into others?
Well, first thing I would say is MTV has to go. I think MTV, in terms of programming, it has deviated so far from its original mission, which was providing music on television. And now it's trended towards, and now is, I assume, exclusively focused on reality TV. It may as well change their name to something like Paramount Reality or something. So either change your name or merge with another network if there's something to that degree already, or just boot it out or shut it down, because I feel like that network has changed its purpose and it's no longer feasible to call it music television anymore. So MTV, I think, has to go. Again, if they want to keep it, they have to change the name. It can no longer be as MTV. So that might be the end of MTV. Who knows? And as far as cable networks go, well, I used to watch back in 2009, I want to say, I used to watch CMT, Country Music Television. I watched it because there was a show called The Singing Bee. That's one of those memories that doesn't come to mind until you really meditate on something that connects to that. But CMT, I used to watch Spike sometimes. Now it's called, I think it's Paramount Network or something. But apart from that, the only one network I could see being watched, apart from, who knows, CBS News, I am not informed on that. But CBS Sports Network, for those people who are into sports and really want to get their info's worth on the sports industry, whether it be NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, MLS, etc. They even have the Liga MX broadcast there now. They got the English language rights just last year. So I think CBS Sports Network could be one of the things that could be profitable in a way. It's a niche type of channel or industry, but I think that it could work. Apart from that, many of the other networks that you mentioned, well, let's go to the Warner Brothers side. Cartoon Network I used to watch. Now I don't really watch it anymore. All in all, I've been more and more distant from television, cable television especially as a whole. Back on the side of Paramount, well, Nickelodeon, there was a time when I would watch SpongeBob and some other shows, The Loud House. Those shows, I guess, in this generation could be something who knows? I don't really follow that anymore. But I guess Nickelodeon and some of the other programming that they have on T-Nick, which that could be something. What else? Back on the Warner Brothers side, they used to have a channel called The Hub, which is legacy programming in terms of what they broadcast. They used to have Batman, the animated series, when I watched it. I'm not sure if they still have that. But also Animaniacs. That's a classic as well. So I think they renamed themselves Discovery Family or something like that. So I think what has come to mind for me is they could merge what Cartoon Network has under the Nickelodeon umbrella. And as for stuff like T-Nick and Discovery Family, they could merge that into something different like Nickelodeon Family or Nickelodeon Classics or something. I don't know if you remember Nick at Night. They used to have the George Lopez show there. I'm not sure if that's still around, but they could move that there as well. So now, how profitable would it be? It would have to depend on demographics. And I'll be honest, I don't know the demographics for those shows or for what they cater to. If old folks will still remember the George Lopez show and pass it on to their children and such. But if that's the case, then what could be, I guess, Nickelodeon Family or something like that could work. But yeah, I think merging Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network would be a solution there if they wanted to carry current programming. And then the rest could be in the other umbrella. But I think looking at Versant, it's reported that they're not doing well. Actually, I was on Google looking at Versant, and there was basically they were reporting a dip in revenue. So that's one sign that Paramount could trim some excess off of what they are about to acquire and what they already have, because what looks like a blessing in disguise could also be a sword to them if they don't manage it properly. So I think merging rather and cuts would definitely benefit this merger. And I know CNN and CBS News are likely to merge, and the employees from CNN are not particularly happy, but I think it's necessary because it'll give them one controlled portfolio to, grew from, I guess. Although I have read that CNN will be independent, as they said. So we'll see how that works out. We'll see in the long run whether it's better to have two news outlets or just one consolidated outlet. But in terms of the other cable networks, I think salvaging from some of it and, just either shutting down or cutting and spinning off those that are not profitable is the way to go. And we'll see how this merger turns out if they launch their own Versant or something. But I think you and I can agree that there are certain cuts that will benefit this merger. So yeah, that's what I think.
Right. And we're going to backtrack just a little bit. First, I want to go back to how you started off your answer to my question. You talked about MTV. MTV, as you said, no longer focuses on music videos. So why should they be called MTV? And it really shows how much they care about music, because just back on December 31st, New Year's Eve of 2025, Paramount shut down several of MTV's 24-hour music-focused channels, such as MTV Music, MTV 80s, and MTV 90s. The fact that they shut down the channels that actually bear the MTV brand really shows how much they care about music. Yet they leave the original MTV going, but yet there isn't an ounce of music on that channel. It's just a bunch of reality shows about people with no class. That's just me telling it like it is. People like to watch that stuff. I'm not a fan of it, but a lot of people like to watch that. I think that's pretty sad too. I personally think they just leave the MTV name on because they know it has value. It's recognizable. Even though it's completely irrelevant to the programming they show, they just leave it up there because it's well known. And that's my theory over why they leave it on. Now, as for Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, I can definitely see these networks merging. And I would say even Discovery Family, which, as you mentioned earlier, was formerly known as The Hub when it was owned by Discovery years before the Warner Brothers merger, I could see all three of these networks being absorbed. Now, Nickelodeon has spin-offs like Teen Nick, but also had a wonderful 90s block called The Splat back before Paramount Plus was launched. A lot of these networks have strayed so far away from their roots because they want people to move to streaming. They want people to subscribe to their streaming platforms. They take the programming from these networks and they put it on the streaming platforms, and then they just put junk programming on the networks themselves, purposely get people to want to subscribe. They want people to say, okay, the programming is so bad and all my favorite shows are on streaming now. I have to get Paramount Plus so that way I can get back to watching my favorite shows again. That's how it is. And also, as you mentioned, maybe they could have a Nickelodeon Family Network. That could possibly happen. Maybe Discovery Family will not join Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network and will instead become Nickelodeon Family or Paramount Family. And then I would also say take the TV Land network and return it back to its roots, because right now nobody watches it. You mentioned Nick at Night earlier. I do remember Nick at Night. Nick at Night was very popular, especially with older people, because they aired a lot of older sitcoms such as I Love Lucy, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, and The Bob Newhart Show, shows along that line. And a lot of these shows have either moved to the Catchy Comedy or MeTV networks, or they're just not on TV, period, anymore. Maybe relaunching TV Land as, I don't know, maybe Paramount Classics or something, and then they get the rights to some of these shows back. I would say take that network, dress it up to look exactly the way it did back when it first launched back in 96, just to invoke that nostalgia feeling, and then add the classics back, especially since that both Paramount and Warner Bros. Have a library full of classic TV shows. I think that would work out really well. You also mentioned that CNN will be remaining independent. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Only time will tell. I'm not sure about that. But we're talking about the potentials of what could happen with these networks should they stay on the air. But now let's talk about some of the assets that could end up getting sold off, because both companies have a lot of assets that are pretty much dealing with low ratings right now, low viewership. If I were David Ellison, these are some of the networks I would consider getting rid of. I would get rid of HLN, TV Land if it's not relaunched, MTV, the Logo Network, Cartoon Network. Those are the networks that come to the top of my head, but nobody's watching any of these channels. In fact, let's go back a few years to when CBS Corp and Viacom were emerging. Les Moonves, the then CEO of CBS at the time, did not want to remerge with Viacom because he knew for a fact that all of Viacom's networks were low rated, and he did not want to head a company that was combined and had to deal with all of these failing networks. The assets of CBS Corporation, especially the CBS network itself, were doing very well, and the assets of Viacom were not, which is ironic because when they split, it was the other way around. Viacom became CBS Corporation, the original, spun off the new Viacom, the new separate company, and that company took the high growth assets while CBS Corporation retained the low growth. Fast forward a decade later and it's the exact opposite. That's one thing we should take note. And then Warner Brothers Discovery has their own problems as well. They actually ended up taking several write-offs on CNN and Cartoon Network in years past because they were just generating massive losses for the company in general. So I definitely can see several of these networks either getting sold or shut down or folded into other networks that are doing better just so they can trim the fat. And again, I said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I think HBO, Cinemax, and Showtime don't really have much of a future either with all the cord cutting going on. Those are premium level cable networks, and people are just not subscribing to cable in general anymore. So if people are not subscribing to cable, what makes anybody think that they're going to be interested in premium level expensive cable packages? So that's my 2 cents over what could happen. I really do feel that once Ellison starts to see which networks are performing well and which aren't, he's going to start making plans to either put them for sale, shut them down, or try to fold them wherever possible. Maybe even rebrand some of them, maybe even reposition them. You and I have both talked about some ideas about how these networks could be repurposed and repositioned.
We did indeed. And HLN, the Logo Network, or whatever it's called, many of the networks that you talked about, they're networks that I don't even know of. I just looked up HLN. Apparently it's called the Headline News Network, and I guess it's in a way a child of CNN or something, but I think it'd be better to just have CNN itself, if anything. And pretty much all the networks you talked about, with the exception of Cartoon Network, are networks that I don't really know about. Although I will say Cartoon Network, you could say that their library in recent years has not exhibited the same type of excitement as even back in 2008 when they did a live action stunt, because they went to live action like Destroy, Build, Destroy or Brain Rush. So yeah, I think there has to be a perfect balance of merging and cutting because many of these networks are bleeding money. And for those that do survive, streaming could also be an option, including that in a package, in a bundle, or whatever. Because at this point, streaming and TV cable networks, they're interchangeable. That's the one thing, like I said, streaming can serve very well in the television sector. So yeah, that's what I have in terms of that.
I agree. There really needs to be a balance or middle ground somewhere. Otherwise, consumers are going to get overwhelmed with too many choices, or not enough choices, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and in terms of not that many choices, it reminds me of what people will criticize about monopolies. Although I will say in this case, it's necessary to have that because many of the classic experiences that we've built our industries upon, they're going extinct. And streaming, it's great again for TV and older movies and stuff. But for theatrical releases, I think going to your local movie theater is much more of an exciting factor. It's more than anything a cultural thing, which that's my whole thing on that. So that's what I've got.
Now, my next question for you is, how do viewers react whenever content libraries get split up or sold off? So here we're about to see several libraries combine into one. You know, in terms of these mergers, people often do get fearful thinking that their favorite franchises will come to an end, or they'll get changed up to the point to where they stray away from their original form to where they become unwatchable. So that's just one thing, but how do you feel about that in general?
Well, I think that, let me first start off with the reactions, which I think people will get intimidated by the fact that they're merging because they believe it's going to be one monopoly over a certain industry or so, or multiple. One of the things that they fear is high prices if you wanted to go to buy a package from Paramount Plus. But again, these, I believe, will have more value. That's what I think. These packages, if they do it correctly, will hold more value than they do right now. Even if the current packages are pretty cheap, yeah, that's just what I think. With the combined IPs, as you say, I guess you get more worth for your money. Think of it as like a Speed Queen washing machine. And here I go with Speed Queen. Compared to a washer like let's actually go to GE, General Electric. They have the cheapest, as far as I know, cheapest washers you can buy. They do well and stuff, and you could get some years out of it. But are they well renowned for their build quality? I don't think so. And then you have Speed Queen. One of their popular choices is the TC series, which costs $1,649 MSRP. So it's very well above the double the price, but you get what you pay for. So I think that's an analogy that could describe this merger going through. If they execute it to perfection, then it could resemble very well just that. Yes, you have to pay more, but there's going to be a much more colorful variety that you're paying for. And because of that, you will get more worth for your penny. Not that there's pennies around, but, that's just what I think.
That's a very good analogy to compare it to, and a nice way of helping other consumers listening to this get a better outlook over what to expect and how they should choose wisely. It is all about value, as I mentioned earlier. It is all about value. You really want to make sure that you can offer something great at a great price point, and it's chock full of benefits to the consumer. People don't want to see price increases, but yet see their content library shrink, or they don't want to see the prices increase or see a small output in general from the company, no matter which areas of business it may be. For example, a lot of people were disappointed with Disney and Fox because once they merged, not only did Disney shut down several Fox divisions, in my opinion, they pretty much shut down 20th Century Fox because, yes, it was still active as a studio, but they barely output any movies after that happened. Fox went from releasing several movies to releasing almost none. I mean, after the Disney merger happened, I didn't see any advertising for any Fox movies or hear about any new films from them, except maybe on occasion. To me, it was as if the studio didn't even exist anymore. I mean, Disney did admit their main reason for buying Fox was to bulk up Disney Plus because they were rolling out Disney Plus around that time. To me, they cared more about Disney Plus than they actually did about 20th Century Fox and its movies.
Yeah, my personal take on that merger, I think they have to divest from 20th Century Studios. That's what they call it now. And subsequently anything that they're not using from the acquisition of 20th Century Fox, they have to remove it, because what's the point of owning those assets, I should say, if you're not going to use them? Soon it's going to be like those companies like Versant, like the cable networks that you mentioned that we should cut from Paramount and Warner Brothers Discovery. So yeah, that's what I think about that.
And also, I feel that the Disney-Fox merger itself was not done right. To me, the way they did it made no sense. What should have happened was, before both companies merged, Disney should have put ABC for sale, and 21st Century Fox should have put Fox News, Fox Business, and all the Fox Sports assets for sale, instead of spinning off Fox Corporation. Sinclair Broadcasting would have been a good buyer for all three of those networks, especially for the Fox News channel due to it being a right-leaning network. And Disney could have sold ABC possibly to Hearst, which is the minority owner of ESPN, another major Disney asset. That would have also worked out better too. To me, that's how they should have merged. There should have been no Fox Corporation. There should have been no acquisition of the Fox Sports networks. I mean, for one thing, it just seems very weird the way it was laid out. It makes things awkward because now you have a company called Fox Corporation that uses the Fox name, and then Disney was also using the Fox name on several assets too. They even own the Fox network in other countries, while the American Fox network went to Fox Corp. So to me, that just created awkwardness too, because they owned ABC, and then one of their sister networks bared the logo of the network that they're competing with. And on top of that, Disney had to pump out programming for both ABC and the Fox network. So to me, it just created tons of awkwardness. The Fox network being owned under Disney with 20th Century Fox Studios would have made more sense than them owning ABC and 20th Century Fox. To me, that's how I see it. It just created a lot of awkwardness, as if them buying out Marvel wasn't awkward enough.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this merger doesn't last, because I don't know, it's just me, but now realizing, I think it'll be like another AT&T Warner Brothers, or AOL Time Warner, all that.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because what does it show that AOL couldn't work out well with Time Warner and Warner Brothers, and then AT&T also couldn't work out well with them either? So that's two flop mergers for the company revolving around the same studio, and now here they are once again hanging up the for sale sign, this time going to Paramount due to Netflix bowing out. I mean, I don't know what's going on with WB and why every company that owns them keeps playing hot potato with them.
Yeah, don't be surprised if this merger is undone by the end of the 2020s.
There is a possibility that that could happen. Maybe so another Versant style company could end up spinning out due to the lack of popularity of cable networks. The reason why cable networks are a dying business are because people are cord cutting. Linear cable networks are just, as much as I hate to say it, they're going the way of the cassette tape, the 8-track, and the VHS, and even the CD as well.
Much agreed. And I think that's one of the checks and balances. Does the FCC do this? They try to prevent a company from owning two networks. So, yeah, again, I am expecting and anticipating this merger to stop.
Yes, I agree. There could be a potential breakup several years from now, and especially with people actually speculating that Netflix may even try to buy the combined company years later. Netflix didn't want cable networks now. They're certainly not going to want them later when they truly are officially dead. A few years from now, cable in general is going to be dead, so there's no way in the world Netflix is going to want a mass collection of cable networks that's even bigger than the one that they rejected originally. Remember, before this all happened, Warner Brothers Discovery had plans to split, spinning off the cable networks into a new company called Discovery Global. But since Paramount wants the whole company, that's not going to happen. And now I want to talk about franchises, IP, and content. So one thing that's important to note is that both companies have storied libraries full of content. They both have loads of movies and loads of television shows. Paramount has their own library of movies and shows. They've got the CBS library. They've got the libraries of shows that belong to their respective networks. And, Warner Brothers has the same thing too. They have the Hanna-Barbera library. There's a whole story about how back in 1986, MGM was briefly owned by Turner Broadcasting, which years later would become part of Time Warner. They owned them for a short amount of time, and then they ended up selling MGM back to its original owners. But when they sold it back to them, they retained the studio's pre-1986 library of TV shows and movies. So as a result, Warner Brothers owns this library now, due to their parent company Time Warner acquiring Turner several years later, and still remains with Warner Brothers to this day. So as you can see, there's a lot of franchises they can work with. One of the biggest crown jewels in Paramount's library area is Star Trek. On the Warner Brothers side, one of their biggest franchise houses is DC Comics, which will also be going to Paramount as well should this merger finish. So, as a consumer, and based on your observations, what types of franchises in general do you feel that consumers are most loyal to? And do you think viewers want more crossovers, or do those feel forced?
Ooh, this is the one area which I'll try the best of my abilities, but I don't feel like I'm going to be much of a voice here. Well, like you mentioned, Star Trek, Mission Impossible, Mannix, I believe, is another TV series. That's from the 60s to the 70s. I don't know how well that was received, but I guess some of the more action-filled and suspense-filled franchises like the 70s. And I know Mannix might not be that exactly. But yeah, I'd say ask someone who watches those types of series from the 70s, and then you could, I guess, get your answer. Let me see DC Comics. So DC Comics, they own the franchises of Superman and Batman, Wonder Woman, and The Flash. Yeah, I think a Star Trek / Batman crossover, or I don't know. I don't exactly know how well received crossovers are, but I think from my limited experience that something fresh to that degree could potentially be intriguing just for nostalgia's sake. Now, actually, this is how I feel. I think at first it'll be well received, and then from there, we'll see. I think it'll likely die out and no longer be profitable, but of course, that'll be after 1 or 2 seasons, maybe 3. But I think there's Teen Titans Go, for example, in terms of Cartoon Network. That's the thing. So if we look at the sidekicks, that'd be Robin, Wonder Girl, Impulse / Kid Flash, and Superboy. And then looking at Teen Titans Go, which is one of the most dominant of shows over there in Cartoon Network. It has, of course, Robin, Raven, Starfire, Cyborg. Speaking from an emotional standpoint, I think, and I'm probably wrong about this, so don't take my word, but I think at first people will have a burning passion to see whatever crossovers there are, like Superman and Mission Impossible, or Batman, or Star Trek, or whatever. But as time goes on, it happens, and we've seen this with SpongeBob after its first 3 seasons, that yes, that's a franchise, not a crossover, but regardless, that the longer a show goes, the less exciting the factor becomes. So at least that's how I see it. I'm not sure how everybody else sees it, but that's what I could say, at least from my knowledge and not actually researching. I didn't do a lot of research into that, so I couldn't give you a more perfect answer, though I wish I would, but that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, what you just described is what I like to call the Simpsons effect. When a show has been on TV for too long, has overstayed its welcome on TV for too long by being on for X amount of number of years. We're talking about it's been on TV for so long that you lose count, that it grows stale. The writers run out of ideas. They end up recycling ideas from old episodes into new episodes, and viewers start to notice. And when they notice this, what do? They quit watching. To me, shows should come to an end at a certain point to avoid that from happening, because burnout and fatigue is a real thing when it comes to plot lines being reused, or if they just feel that the show just continues to recycle old ideas because the writers themselves are getting fatigued and running out of new ideas themselves. So, writers get fatigued when they too start to run out of new ideas. So that does cause viewership to go down. And so, yeah, you're right. But yeah, other than that, crossovers, I think just depend on whether they're in demand or not.
Yeah, and I don't know, but I think we have to get some new writers who are willing to start new comics or something to the degree of Batman, but obviously have their own creative ideas instead of recycling and, having to reuse. If only we could get back to that era. If only we could do that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think TV or movies are ever going to be the same again. But from either side, from either the Paramount or WB side, which franchises do you think are going to get prioritized once this merger closes? And which ones do you think are going to probably be paused or scaled back, based solely on your opinion and your observation?
Well, I think most of the older classics, based on the, nostalgic value, it also depends on demographics, whether older viewers or newer viewers are watching. It also can be newer, but, they would have to have watched this through their parents audience as well. So I would look at demographics, and that's an area that I have not researched. But let's say that it's older people watching it. Yeah, Star Trek, Mission Impossible, the original series is, well, to be honest, those would be in a classic style showing. Maybe primetime if it gets to that degree where it's dominantly old folks watching it from the 60s. And so I don't know, actually, I don't have an exact answer. But generally, I think what has to get paused or scaled back are those ideas that are just repetitive and that run for a while. I think 3 seasons is a limit that I could see for a crossover, for example. Steven Hillenburg, he wanted to only have SpongeBob for 3 seasons, and then the movie came in and he wanted that to end. But no, the rest of the crew wanted to keep on capitalizing on that success. But yeah, SpongeBob ran through 3 seasons and then the movie came, and then Hillenburg wanted to end it after that, but it continued based on the demand of the rest of the company, Nickelodeon and such. So I don't know. I think they have to be smart about it, of course. Yes, a franchise can be successful, it can be long running, but I think they also have to sense their way into the viewer. Are they going to want to watch it anymore after this and that? If it hits a certain point, like a certain finale or something, maybe it would just be best to end it off there and not continue. I don't know. So it's not much of a concrete answer. It's just a more abstract thing that I'm providing. But those are my thoughts on that to my abilities. I'll be honest, I haven't watched most of these franchises. I'm not a franchise guy like Star Wars, for example. I know Star Wars is Lucasfilm and 20th Century Fox, but, not even that do I excel in proficiency on. But, that's what I think.
Let's be honest. SpongeBob is basically Nickelodeon's Mickey Mouse at this point. And Nickelodeon was never very respectful of Steven Hillenburg's wishes to begin with. Hillenburg never wanted any spin-offs to be made of SpongeBob, but guess what happened? As soon as he passed away, they released 2 spin-offs that weren't very well received by SpongeBob fans. And shows like that are shows that suffer from the Simpsons effect because they've been on TV for way too long. They've overstayed their welcome on TV, and their storylines start to get dry because, again, the writers are running out of ideas. So yes, I agree with you that they need to start scaling back on things that are repetitive and put a focus on shows and movies that people truly do want to watch. That's just common sense in general. Networks need to know when the stopping point is for a certain TV or movie series and get ready to start putting a cap on it once they realize that it has hit that point to where viewers are getting exhausted. Well, they're satisfied. They feel that the series could end right then and there and then close it off without them getting exhausted or tired of it, because they will end up losing big if they don't know when to put a limit on these things.
Well, I can speak for SpongeBob, but they said that unless one of the voice actors dies, the series will keep on going. So if Tom Kenny dies, or Bill Fagerbakke, or Carolyn Lawrence, or who else? Mr. Lawrence, Doug, or Clancy Brown, or Roger Bumpus, if any of those pass away, then that's basically where the whole story ends. So it's going to go on for a while until they hit that point. So I wouldn't expect them to listen, to stop it, to wind down production on that and any possible spin-off. So yeah, that's what I think. I think SpongeBob for them is too big of an asset or a franchise to stop production outright.
Yes, I totally agree with you there.
I think the biggest thing for me that I'm looking at, and who knows, it might be a bigger priority than I believe, or it may not be as big as I think, but sports. That's one area that you and I talked about a few streams for a while, actually. So CBS Sports, they own the NFL, they own the rights to college basketball and such. And then we look at TNT Sports. They recently gotten the rights to FIBA, which is the International Basketball Federation, which is basically kind of like the World Cup of basketball, sort of. Let me just look at who owns the Champions League US rights. Yeah, CBS owns the rights for the Champions League as well through the 2029-30 season. So I know we discussed some scenarios where there could be a merger with CBS Sports and TNT Sports, and, the MLB is also on PBS, and they are partners for March Madness. CBS, TNT Sports, and TBS are all partners for March Madness. So I think, especially in that regard, you could have March Madness as one unified umbrella, I will call it for now. But I think that will provide uniformity. And the one thing I'm very intrigued about is NHL rights. As you know, ESPN and TNT have a contract with the NHL for TV rights. Together, it runs to the 2027 to 28 season. So after 2028, that's when TNT would end their rights and also ESPN. Now, a lot of people, I know I'm taking a tangent, but they're not very happy with how ESPN has handled the NHL. But, you know, they had the MLB as well, and now they've given that up. So maybe they improve. I wouldn't know to tell you, but that's another story. Now, TNT, they have received a lot of praise for their handling of the broadcasting coverage of the NHL. Although I will say that they've gotten heat for having remote broadcasting. That's the only thing. But apart from that, they've been much better received than ESPN has. So I'm really intrigued to see what CBS or Paramount does now that they're merging. I'm intrigued to see what they do concerning the NHL, whether we would see a move to the NHL to CBS, of course, out of all things. Because think about it. The only true major league sports that out of the top five, NFL, NBA, MLB, and NHL and MLS. I'll throw that in there. They only have the NFL, so pretty much everything else is more niche. Well, you could say college basketball is a big area, especially with March Madness, which I think is going to start soon, March 17th, as a matter of fact. But anyways, I think adding the NHL would be a big booster, not just for the NHL itself in coverage, but also it would give Paramount / Warner Brothers an area to watch on broadcast television, because let's face it, although TNT / TBS, their broadcasts are very good, TNT is just a cable network. It's not broadcast television. So you can't view it just by using your antenna. So I think buying Warner Brothers Discovery and inheriting that right would be pretty convenient. That's why I made a Reddit thread about it. And the 4 responses that I got concerning their thoughts is, well, they've said that this merger is going to take a long time. And one of them mentioned that there's some states that could block this merger. Like you mentioned as well, the California Attorney General or something could block this merger or call for a annulment or something. But let's say that all this goes through. I think what the NHL or what CBS should do is, if they're not keen on having the NHL on CBS, have it as the NHL on TNT or whatever they have it on currently. I think the NHL on TNT still, or TNT Sports. Have it as that for a while, and also simulcast it on CBS and test and probe the ratings there. Now, with the boost that this sport has gotten, especially with last year, the 4 nations face off, I think it's last year, but regardless, that was a big thing, and it helped out in the ratings for hockey in general. At least that's how I feel. And the Olympics, although you couldn't see it, the ratings may have not reflected that per se because of the time slot. I think that there would have been some big ratings if it was in prime time. But, you know, I think things like that, especially US and Canada, and without getting into politics, the current state that they're in, both countries that are now turning into rivals, I think that could boost things. And yeah, I don't know. I just want to see CBS test out some of these sports, not just the NHL, MLB on TBS. That's another thing. It's exclusively on cable and not on broadcast television. I want to see if they want to test the MLB as well, because yes, it's lost some of its fling to the NFL, but it's still a sport that is very much profitable, I'd say. And yes, there might be some initial, I guess, struggles with Fox, or now NBC is in the mix starting soon. But I want to see CBS test out some of these broadcasts, MLB and NHL. Of course, the rights to the NBA TBS/TNT. TNT Sports no longer has that. But with what TBS has right now, I want to see them do something in terms of having a trial period, and then they could build up this whatever graphics package and talent and studios, and we could see from there whether it be profitable or not, or if they are no longer interested for whatever reason. Or I heard the NFL is doing a new media rights deal that they want to get in by the start of next season. So we'll see how that goes. But I do want to see the NHL and even the MLB on CBS, because I feel like there's not enough major league coverage from CBS's part. That's what I wanted to cover on the sports department. And I think, at least for me, I use TV to watch sports. So I wonder how big that would be and how it'll work out overall. So that's what I think.
Well, one thing that companies look for in any merger, one thing that companies look for is synergy. They want to see how many of their divisions can work together on one job. And you described that perfectly. As you mentioned, CBS is a broadcast network. It's free to get. All you need is an antenna. You don't need cable to get it. And putting the NHL games on there would definitely increase their reach, especially to those who do not subscribe to cable or satellite because they just want to watch free antenna TV. So that would definitely be a plus. And March Madness and the NCAA, that is also going to be another key selling point for this merger. I mean, CBS, TNT, and TBS have been partners in simulcasting March Madness for several years now. So, having them together under one company will only help them, because now they don't ever have to worry about that partnership dissolving, because they're now sister networks. They can keep it going indefinitely until their contract with the NCAA runs out. Going back to NHL, ESPN has been doing a poor job handling them, because they're putting all their games on ESPN Plus when a lot of people just want to be able to watch them on traditional linear TV. That's why a lot of people are upset. But, sports is a big game, and the new Paramount Warner Bros. Combo is definitely going to benefit strongly from it. These relationships they hold with all these sport teams is really going to benefit. You also mentioned, what about MLB on TBS? I think that could work very good. Why? Because let's remember that TBS used to be a superstation back in the day. They were simulcasting out of Atlanta, Georgia. During those days, they did carry MLB games. They carried Atlanta Braves games. Those did very well on TBS. And then, of course, Time Warner decided to shift TBS away from being a superstation to a full-fledged cable network, and that meant the end of seeing those games on the network. So, yeah, MLB could definitely do well on TBS. Everything you said was spot on.
I don't know how the NHL will look at the statistics on its revenue in terms of ESPN. Not only have they been getting heat for their broadcasting handling, they've also gotten heat over their broadcast teams, which is another thing which we won't go into detail, but I think ESPN in general has, in the eyes of many, flopped. One of the things I will say, though, is they did not reintroduce Gary Thorne back into the team. That's one of the things that fans were hoping to get Gary Thorne. He was the original NHL on ABC and ESPN broadcast play-by-play member or announcer. So, yeah, ESPN, I wouldn't be surprised if they bow out after this contract expires. I think if they bow out, then that would leave the NHL in a very desperate, oh, I need heaven, and I'm situation. So I think if the NHL loses ESPN, or if ESPN loses out on the NHL, that leaves the NHL with no choice but to maximize their concentration on getting at least one broadcast network to broadcast these games. So they would try to make as lucrative of an offer as they can to CBS Sports. Of course, NBC is gone. They've decided not to continue with NBC, although who knows if they re-enter the picture. What else? Well, ABC, that's ESPN. Fox, I don't know how I would feel. It would be a welcome for nostalgic purposes. But I think more than anything, if they lose out on ESPN, then I think that CBS would be the logical choice, because let's be honest, I don't want to see a cable exclusive broadcast of the NHL. That would be bad for the NHL. So I would say, first and foremost, I want to get CBS as my main broadcasting partner. After that, we could reevaluate where we are and decide, hey, is it profitable to give rights to another network like ESPN if they decide to renew their contract, or another dark horse? Boy, imagine if the CW CW becomes the main for NHL, one of the main networks or something. That'll be something. But yeah, I would maximize my concentrations on, if you're the NHL, try to win over CBS for another period so that you would have that cushion to fall on, because I think CBS, they're spending a lot on sports from what I've heard, and I think adding the NHL would be a good look on their portfolio. And same thing for MLB. They've got Fox and they've got now NBC. Now, will CBS be able to afford the MLB on their side? That's something that's to be announced, but we'll see how that goes. But I would definitely do my best to get the NHL. I don't know. I feel like I'm bouncing around, but I'm very intrigued on the NHL more than anything else at the moment. And CBS, but you could technically apply this to the MLB, to any of their other sports. Hey, even the UFC is on Paramount Plus now, so it makes sense for them to take a swing on the NHL. So yeah, but really sports in general.
Yes, and this acquisition is going to be CBS's easiest path to acquiring the NHL, right? Due to TNT already having them. So it's going to be very interesting to see what could end up happening. I mean, for one thing, there's just all sorts of possibilities of where it could go. And keep in mind, to David Ellison, money is almost no object. I mean, his dad helped him finance the Warner Bros. Buyout. So when these companies merge, getting the rights to whatever sports team he wants to be aired on CBS or whichever network he wants to air on should be no problem. Money is literally no object to this man.
Well, in that case, it would be a pretty easy and straightforward thing to consider the NHL and the MLB being at least extended to CBS. In fact, we got some articles about Gary Bettman, who is the commissioner of the NHL. He gave his thoughts on that. He says, I can't wait to meet David Ellison and talk about those things. I would be very excited to see the opportunity that being with CBS and CBS Sports would present. I think for the NHL, what's happening with Paramount and Warner Bros. Discovery is potentially very good for us, so consider me a fan. So, TNT Sports, it's not scheduled to air the Stanley Cup Final until 2027. So that gives a little bit of time, a little bit of leeway for CBS to finalize any potential details to their broadcasting, whether it be acquiring new talents or preparing for the different combinations of broadcasting and whatever comes their way, including the graphics packages, which we've discussed. So they could work on those things. They could iron it out. They could carry on with the NHL on TNT until the end of this season, which that's going to happen, no question. Now it's a matter of when in the process of this merger, CBS Sports and TNT Sports, or whoever handles the rights for the NHL and the MLB on TNT and TBS, when those two become merged officially. I don't know exactly how mergers work. Does it just take all of a sudden after, say, 2 years, it becomes merged all as one? Or do certain companies and networks merge one by one? I'm not sure, but I prefer it to be the latter so that this process could be expedited and CBS could test out this format and have an even better look. In fact, I would be in agreement if TNT Sports offered the NHL to be simulcast, at least for the playoffs, on CBS to test out ratings for that. I wouldn't be against that a bit. So same thing for the MLB. And I think having the postseason on CBS simulcast there would be a great test. It would enable them to assess the ratings before actually preparing the necessary changes, rather, to transition from TNT Sports or TBS or whatever to CBS Sports. And given that they keep CBS Sports Network, they could move some of the NHL or MLB programming that they're not airing on broadcast television if they really need to, and broadcast it on CBS Sports Network. So, those are some just ideas that I have that they're likely not going to happen, like the whole playoffs and the postseason on CBS just for testing purposes. But it's a good idea to have that sort of baseline to get the results there.
Very true. And it's all speculation, but I do have to agree with everything that you said as well as what Gary Bettman said. He is right about that. And the NHL playoffs definitely have a good future on CBS. CBS Sports Network may or may not exist later on. Again, it could become a victim of cord cutting. Ellison's might decide decide it's no longer a core asset worth keeping around. But regardless of whether or not these networks get cut or not, the future of sports on TV can still remain strong thanks to Paramount and Warner Bros. Discovery coming together because of all these synergies. CBS does have the potential to carry a lot of these playoffs or just a lot of these games in general, and broadcast TV is the best way to get audiences. And not only that, but it couldn't have come to a better network than CBS. So out of all the networks to get these prime sports rights at plum times, it's definitely CBS. Not NBC, not Fox, not ABC, it's CBS. So that is definitely going to be a key, and the Ellisons will make a huge killing there. They're going to be making so much money with just on that alone that they're not going to know what to do with. Sports is going to make up the majority of this combined company's revenue, probably more than movies or syndication or anything else. Sports is going to be the number one source of revenue for the combined Paramount and Warner Brothers.
Oh, absolutely. And I think CBS, with the lack of major league sports that they have, they only got the NFL. I think this would maximize them and cement them as a sports hub more than beyond a sports hub. Now, CBS Sports Network, that could move to streaming, perhaps, who knows? Or, like I said, it could just stop existing. But yeah, apart from that, yeah, agreed. I think the Ellisons have to make a swing. More than likely, it'd be a home run. At least that's what I want to think. But I think that having the NHL would be not only good for CBS, but also more than anything for the NHL for coverage, like you said. I don't know why ESPN is doing that, moving their stuff to ESPN Plus. It's limiting their scope of word. Like, you know, I'm going to cut to Jesus for a moment. He said to all of us, make disciples of every nation. That's how we spread. I think of that analogy right there. The NHL, it's not Jesus, but let's just say it's like Jesus. It's saying, go and make disciples of every nation. So the disciples of every nation would be the people who watch. So I like to think of it as that. The better and more broadness that the NHL has, the more likely that this sport would be successful in the United States. And it's kickstarted by the successfulness of the, I don't know if that's a word or not, but the success of the Four Nations Face-Off, jointly hosted by ESPN and TNT. And also, I know this is NBC, but the Olympics, although the timings were really screwed them, but regardless, I think that the U.S. versus Canada gold medal match really impacted the U.S. in a positive way. So I think this would be great for the sport of hockey. And last thing I'll read about Bettman and regarding this whole sports landscape is he knows that the NFL wants to make a new contract or new deal, rather. He said, if the NFL is serious and is in the marketplace now, maybe we tuck under, maybe we wait until they're done. Either way, the NFL has a large footprint, to say the least, and in this environment, if they sneeze, we'll probably get pneumonia. I believe in the value of our product. He's talking about the NHL, and I believe whether it's now or in a couple of years that we'll ultimately come out in a good place with the fair value we deserve. And concerning the merger, I think for the NHL, what's happening between Paramount and Warner Bros. Discovery potentially very good for us. To consider me a fan, and he's very excited to see David Ellison. And he says having two partners is a mixed bag. He said, on one hand, it's very fan and user friendly, but if you're on 6 or 7 outlets, you get promoted in 6 or 7 places. I'm not complaining, and I do believe that ESPN, Disney, and Warner Bros. Discovery are doing a great job promoting us, but the more places you are, the more visible you are. And also, he said about the regional sports network stuff, that the league is taking an all of the above approach to local rights distribution. Some will stay on regional sports channels. A few of them are still viable. Some will go to the direct streaming like AMPC, which is owned by Victory Plus, which is the broadcaster of the Dallas Stars and Anaheim Ducks right now. And some are going over the air. Now, at the end of the article, it says, but the league does not appear to be pursuing the same kind of centralized local rights solution that baseball and the NBA are believed to be developing, at least not yet. We're just making sure we're going down parallel paths because the economic model, nobody's quite figured out yet. So I won't go into much detail right now on this, but concerning the whole local rights thing, I think it would be pretty beneficial to have a NFL style rights deal where the NFL has a market that they broadcast a game to. So they send out their crew so that they could broadcast it at that location, and then they reserve another window for the big game that they're broadcasting. I think the NHL could do something similar to that with their networks. We'll see how that works works out what the NHL, and we'll have to see what they decide on. But I think that, I don't know, I think it would be a pretty beneficial way to go about it, given how regional sports networks are dying, especially with FanDuel Sports Network filing for bankruptcy.
RSNs are a dying market, and for those who don't know, that stands for Regional Sports Network. And it's why Warner Brothers Discovery just recently exited the RSN business. They own the AT&T Sportsnet networks, which were a carryover from when Warner Media was owned by AT&T. And it is all about increasing local reach. Just as he said, you get promoted in 6 or 7 different places. That will happen not only by being on multiple networks, but what if you're on one network that everybody can get? And that's CBS. Everybody can get CBS. Everybody who doesn't have cable, they can get CBS on the antenna. By getting on CBS, they are putting themselves in 1,000 times more different places because they are now available to be carried on a network that everybody can easily get. He's talking in terms of being on multiple cable outlets. But what happens if you're just on one network that everybody can get? Now you're putting yourself on multiple TVs just by going through one network, a free-to-air broadcast network that everybody can get via antenna. So to me, it's probably the best thing that could ever happen for them. They can finally get that coverage that they truly deserve. All we have to do is wait and see on what happens with this merger. Right now, we have to wait on the regulatory process to go through. The DOJ has to approve this. It also has to get approved by governing bodies in other countries as well. And of course, even the states can object to it. Yes, you were right about what you said earlier. The Attorney General of California is hotly against this merger and wants to block it. So these are little obstacles along the way. And of course, shareholders have to vote too. They have to vote for the merger. There's probably a good chance that they're going to approve it. So all I can say is it's going to be a very, very interesting next few months to see how things go. I'm going to be watching it very closely just because it is something that I'm curious about. Not everybody's interested in media mergers, but this is something that I like to keep my eye on just because it is a special interest of mine as a businessman and as a graphic designer. Real quickly, I want to mention graphics packages. CBS has some of the best graphics in the game for their NFL broadcasts. And you and I have talked about it numerous times. They've got a nice score bug. They've got a nice lower thirds. All their on-screen bugs look really nice in addition to their score bug. My personal favorite being their final score bug, which shows at the end of each game. That thing is just beautiful. As a graphic designer, I give them an A+ on their effort for what they have put into all their graphics. But I give them an A++ for their final score bug.
Oh my. Yeah. CBS has had in my special part of mind a soft place for their score bug, and as you call it, a final score bug. A lot of graphics that I've designed for my own purposes, I've based them off of that. A lot of people will love NBC for their Sunday Night Football graphics, which their current package that they introduced, it looked fantastic and beautiful. But CBS, I feel that, I'll be honest, the one that they introduced in Super Bowl 50, it was okay, but it did miss some of that factor that I loved. And I think 2021 Super Bowl 55, like, it was different and it established the baseline for what we see now. But since then, I've been very intrigued. Their motion graphics were pretty good, I will say about that, for Super Bowl 55 onward. And now with this new graphics package that has been evolving with Super Bowl 58, I think that's one of the best, especially for a network that only does, I guess, regional broadcasts, sort of, in a way. The one who doesn't have the same packages as, you know, Prime Video or NBC or ESPN. I think they've done a great job with all the resources that they have, and maybe some minor tweaks that they could use could help. Like, for example, for the numbers of the score, they could add an outline to make it pop even more, or some sort of gradient as well. But apart from that, they've done a really great job, especially with the package that they have and what they're using. So if this is where they're going with the graphics, I'm excited to see what we see in 2028, which is when they broadcast their next Super Bowl with Super Bowl 62. That's the next Super Bowl that they're scheduled to broadcast, at least in this contract that they're on.
Yes, it's going to be a very interesting to see what happens with all these changes in graphics, because each year goes by, they have to keep modernizing. And going back to CBS, their final score bug looks looks like something straight out of an Xbox game. And I'm talking about the old school original Xbox from the early 2000s. It's a nice graphic, and even though that pretty much puts a date on the style, it's like they took that style but brought it into 2026. They took something that's old school and made it look modern for the new era. And that's what these companies need to do in order to keep up with their graphics package. As a graphic designer myself, it's all about keeping up with the latest trends. Certain fonts, certain styles that worked for 20 years ago will not work today. Sans serif fonts are more popular now. And when it comes to on-screen graphics, beveling and 3D effects are the thing now, versus back in the day you would see more flat-looking effects and more generic-looking fonts. But that's only because graphic design has been changing as the decades go by. And that's definitely my final word on the matter. Now, as we get ready to close out this BizCast episode, I would also like to ask you, is there anything else that you would like to add as part of your closing remarks, whether it be about the sports aspect or the streaming aspect or just about the merger in general?
My final points, I guess, would be David Ellison. If you're listening to this, please do all you can to get the NHL, the MLB, and whatever interests you may have to CBS. I think it'll benefit not only your network, but it'll benefit the sports itself. Maybe we'll see a resurgence in the MLB, and the NHL, I feel, will benefit greatly. I can already tell. Now, I hope that everybody else who's listening to the BizCast has taken away a few things from these ideas. Like, one of the ideas I remember giving is the packages for a TV exclusive package while having the classic benefits of what a theater should have, because they've been, I feel, losing money to streaming, and I feel that this merger will give a balance so that you could go to your local cinema, Regal Entertainment, or whatever cinema or movie theater you have, and enjoy the same movies that you're going to watch just the way you're meant to, at a certain place, with all excitement and with the best sound systems available. And as for the TV for franchises, I hope that this new merger, that all the people will realize how much it means to be sensible to what the viewer wants to see. If it's drawn out and worn out, people will get weary about it. So be sensitive to your audience, look at your demographics, and from there, evaluate what you need and what you don't need. And for the cable networks, I know you're going to retain CNN and such, but just be smart about what you obtain from Warner Brothers and what you have already as Paramount. So make the necessary changes, mergers, absorptions, and cuts you need. Just, be smart about it. It sounds great on paper, but you also have to be smart about what you retain and what you merge and what you reject. So basically, I'd say be smart about these things and go all in for NHL and MLB, which that last point right there is my main thing. So that's all I can say right now off the top of my head.
And my final remarks are going to be about basically how all the synergies are going to play out, in addition to how CBS has the potential to go above being number one. With all the content that they're acquiring and all the sports rights that they could get, it has the potential to propel CBS to be at the top. I mean, there's so many assets involved, so many different networks. To me, the one that is truly going to stand out and be the top performer out of all of them is going to be the CBS network. The cable networks, I have mixed feelings about them. Some of them are going to do well, especially the ones carrying sports, but the others that are just kind of struggling and not doing very well, lower viewership, it's going to be a hit or miss unless you can do something to repurpose them. But the streaming aspect, when it comes to the streaming, you're going to be able to offer your customers endless amounts of content, because you're going to have all these libraries to pull content from at a sports tier that includes sports broadcasts as well, in addition to your existing programming libraries. Just like how Disney has ESPN Plus, you can add a tier to Paramount Plus that includes exclusive access to certain sports rights. And with all the networks that you're acquiring, we can see that bolster quite a bit. It's good for the NHL. It's going to be good for the MLB too. CBS and Paramount Plus are going to be the two assets that are going to be the biggest winners within this whole merger. Just make sure you keep it at a cost that people are still going to agree with. Otherwise, people are going to say it's expensive, and they're going to say that all their fears about costs rising are just becoming true right before their very eyes. KPIs, and you don't want that to happen. Offer something with value. I'm telling them right now, in order to offer value, offer these tiers, include a sports package, and contribute to CBS accordingly, in addition to Paramount Plus. These two are going to be your crown jewels of this whole merged company. So yeah, that's my final word. So yes, Cesar, thank you once again for joining me on BizCast and talking about this. I hope that all of our listeners were able to get a very good outlook of over what to expect once the two companies merge. And for those naysayers out there, I hope that they have a different outlook as well, and that they're able to change their mind about how they feel. Too many people are fearful about costs rising or their favorite TV shows and franchises disappearing, but honestly, it's hard to say what's going to happen. We can't predict the future. We're not God. So all I can say is it's just going to be a very, very interesting 2026 and beyond to see what's truly going to happen as we watch the regulatory process unfold, as well as once the merger completes, what's going to stay, what's going to go, what's going to survive and such, and how sports are going to be distributed. To everybody out there, happy viewing, happy streaming, and we hope that you enjoyed this episode of BizCast and learned a lot, and we look forward to having you in the next one.
Thank you so much, folks. Yeah, thank you for having me, Christian. It's a pleasure to be here, and I wish the best for the BizCast, and whatever topics come along the way, it's going to be a great source of voices, whatever comes our way, whether it be companies or, trends or music, whatever happens in this world. I trust that this podcast will go on for as long as it needs to. So once again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and it's been a way to rid myself out of my social inhibitions. So thank you again. Thank you, and God bless.
God bless you too, brother. Thank you for joining us once again. All your contributions were on point, and I know that a lot of our listeners are going to benefit from your wonderful commentary.